Romans 13:1. Let everyone submit to the governing authorities, since there's no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are instituted by God. So government is God's idea, that this was instituted by God. And the purpose later in Romans 13 of the government is to praise those that do good and to restrain those that do evil. We should really pay attention to what it is that he said and try to move our government, try to pick representatives that will move us in that direction of restraining evil and promoting what is good.
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Mike Stansbury. Welcome to the Iron Deep podcast. Got a great guest on the show today. His name is David Tillman, and David Tillman and I will be talking about how Christians should engage in politics. David Tillman, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Good to be here, Mike. How are
Well,
you?
David, I'm doing great. Tell the audience a little bit about who you are, what your background is, what do you do for a living, and yeah, let's get to know you a little bit before we start.
Well, the most important thing about me is I'm Mike Stansbury's friend,
That's right.
and I live in Memphis, Tennessee. I am a pastor, been a pastor for about 25 years, which is also the amount of time I've been married. My wife, Jennifer, have two kids, both in high school this year, and one that's kind of getting ready to move on to college and all of that. So that consumes a lot of my time. My wife and I also started a business this past year, and that's been a fun, actually, it was 2 years ago, fun growing experience for us.
So, look at this. He's a pastor. He's an entrepreneur. He's a father. He's got a lot of things going on. And so, what are your specific pastoral duties right now, David?
Well, that's interesting. I have a lot of pastoral duties. I am a teaching pastor, and I was a worship pastor for about 20 years. So I also oversee the worship aspect of our church, and then also assimilation. When new people come to church, just connecting with them, making sure that they can kind of see the pathway for them getting connected at our church regarding whether that's serving or membership or small groups, that type of thing.
All right. Well, folks, David, thanks for that. Wanted to begin by asking a question about this topic that we're talking about: is how do Christians, how do believers, how does the faith community engage in politics, engage in local government? What is just a broad answer to that, and then we'll get into some maybe specific details and reactions to just what's going on in our society today. We do have an election coming up. We're recording this in early October, and so I think we're about 30 days away from having our national elections. But question being, somebody comes to you, pastor, and say, you know what, how do we engage in politics? What's that look like for you? What's your answer to that?
Well, I think the first thing that and this is going to sound super obvious, but it's really not, is that Christians should engage in politics. I think some people have the idea that, well, we need to be separate from the world, so that means that we're citizens of another kingdom, which of course is true, and Jesus is the king of that kingdom, but we live here in this kingdom of the earth, and more specifically as United States citizens, and we have an opportunity to influence the policies that our government institutes by exercising our votes. So I've actually read that in the last election that there were some 30 million evangelicals that didn't vote at all. And I can only assume that's just because they thought, well, I'm sure there's a lot of reasons, but some of the ones I've heard is that, well, there's not a, perfect candidate. And so I just don't feel like I can put my stamp on this. But one of the misconceptions about our government is I was also a political science major, by the way, so I care about this stuff quite a bit. But one of the misconceptions about our government is that we live in a democracy, which we really don't. We live in a constitutional republic, and the people that we elect are our representatives. And so if the people that we elect are our representatives, then the boss is actually me and the boss is you. So the voters are the ones that are actually in charge. And The problem is if the church abdicates our role to run the country and move us in the direction of policy that would ensure religious liberty, that would move us towards righteousness and restrain evil. If the government, I'm sorry, if the Christian community abdicates from that, then what we do is we step out and we let people that don't serve God, don't want to move our country towards righteousness. We let those people have this a more disproportionate vote, and I don't think that's a good thing at all. I think we should definitely engage.
Both of us have, we're both close to 49, 50 years old. We've seen actually this play out in our life. The we've seen this play out. It seems like the most of the Christians that I talk to think that things are really, really getting worse. And sometimes we'll point to, well, sometimes we'll have a different theology and say, well, it's going to get worse before it gets better. And then sometimes it's like we can look back, and this is me kind of talking about my opinion. We can look back and go, okay, we forgot to engage in our government. We forgot to engage in the process, or we haven't made our we haven't treated this like a republic. We've been told by other people that we should keep our religion separate from the way that we vote and the way that we act, which is it's very hard to do. So the question is what do you say to somebody that is, hey, you've seen fruit of the spirit in their lives, but they say, what, I just don't think, we should engage in politics. We shouldn't, we shouldn't force our beliefs on, somebody else. Just because we believe this doesn't mean, um, we should force this belief down society. Does that make sense?
I know I understand exactly what you're saying, and I think that it's very naive to look at the laws that are passed in our country and say that there aren't moral views being enforced. They're being enforced on us all the time. And the role of government. In fact, I was reading Romans 13 this morning, like Romans 13:1. Let me read it to you. It says, "Let everyone submit to the governing authorities, since there's no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are instituted by God." So government is God's idea, that this was instituted by God. And the purpose later in Romans 13 of the government is to praise those that do good and to restrain those that do evil. And what's interesting to me is that politicians, even politicians that would say, I don't, there aren't very many politicians that would say they're not Christians. Most of them do say that, but they speak in very moral terms. Even people that they don't think it's a good idea to enforce morality, and what they mean is biblical values on other people. They speak in very moral terms. I don't know if you've noticed this, that
I
talking
have.
about immigration, the a border wall is immoral, or it's immoral to deny a woman's right to choose, or it's more. There are these very moral terms. They have to be coming from somewhere, but they're not coming from Scripture. So everyone is speaking in these moral terms, but we have to back up and say, okay, well, what moral terms do we actually want to live under? I mean, is there a God? And if there is, if he's spoken, then we should really pay attention to what it is that he said and try to move our government, try to pick representatives that will move us in that direction of restraining evil and promoting what is good. And the big problem comes when government does the opposite. And I think we're seeing that right now, that a lot of things that are objectively evil, if you look at scripture, that are evil are being promoted, and a lot of things that are good are we're trying to stamp those out. And we can go into some of the specifics of what those are, but I mean, there's a lot of things that come to mind.
Yeah, there are some specifics. A couple of articles that I was reading recently in the last 2 years, with regard to some of the folks that are on the pro life issue. There have been people that are in jail because um, they protested at a either at a pro-life rally or near a an abortion clinic, and uh, we've got a lady that's I think 72 years old, and she is sitting in jail right now, and she's in jail for a while because she peacefully protested at a abortion clinic. And if you were
Mike, what was
to,
she do? What was she doing? I've heard this, and I'm just, was she
well,
literally just praying in front of the abortion clinic? And I,
yes, yeah, she was praying, and they heaped some other laws on her about trespassing, and then also we'll put it in the show notes where the specific language is and what they have accused her of and why she's sitting in jail. But the broader picture is that there are things happening to people that they're going and they're we're jailing people for these crimes that these prosecutors can just kind of make up and not make up, but they can enforce in different parts of the country, just depending on how red or blue your state is, and so the fairness of it seems to me being questioned, and this is it seems like it's accelerating. But to that specific point, like within and this is our justice system we're talking about. We're going off a little bit on it, but we're dealing with a lot of issues here. What I want to do now, David, is we have some really strong Christian periodicals that are coming out with guides on voting. And my wife sent me this Instagram reel that we're going to take a look at, and I just want to hear your reaction to this. I think this gentleman had a lot to say here, some that I agree with, and some that I just kind of want to go over with to see if we can help our audience with it. But this is Johnny DeVenis, and he's a pastor, I believe, in Nashville. So let's listen to what he has to say.
This is not an aside, but I think it is something that is fitting because of the text we're in, that many people confuse Jesus' mission. I saw a pastor this week, very well-known pastor, that said, he tweeted or something, never Trump, this year Harris, always Jesus. I just want you to understand that is one of the most foolish things I've ever seen. And here's why. People have asked me this week if I have opinions politically. I have opinions, a lot of them. I'm not a political commentator. I'm a preacher of the Bible, but certain things politically are more theological than they used to be. So let me just give you some things about where I stand, because people texted me a few things, and I'll just, this stuff is not hard for me to say. Number one, the Democratic Party is a demonic death cult under the power and influence of Satan. Hold on. No, I'll explain why I say hold on. To vote for the Democrats is to vote for a platform that is building their platform upon everything God hates. The mutilation of bodies, the annihilation of babies in the womb, and the sexualization of your children. That is their calling card. That is what they want to do. They don't hide that. They have abortion facilities outside of the Democratic Convention. This is who they are. It's the most radical party in our country's history. So I don't see how you could be a Christian and vote for a party who promotes everything that God hates. That's the first thing. Secondly, you have a responsibility and privilege to vote for the option that best stems the tide of evil. I want you to also understand that there are no perfect candidates in this election. They're both broken people. But one of them presents a far better option at the preservation of life and the upholding of the family than the other. A failure to vote is a failure to express our gratitude to the men and women that have died for our country and given us the freedom that we have today. It's also a failure to, I believe, obey the calling that we have to uphold the righteousness in our land. You don't have to like the personality. You just vote for the best option between the policies. And one of them is far less worse than the other. I think that's obvious. And a vote, just in general, it comes from the Latin word votum, which means to make a choice. You're not voting for a pastor. You're voting for a guy that, as best we have as an option, upholds righteousness in the land. Number 3, and this is why I said hold on, because there are certain people that are going to amen the political thing, but I also want the amens just to be as loud as when I say this. Our hope is not in a political party. Who is in the White House is far less important than who is on the throne in heaven. And I want you to also understand, because I've watched some videos this week that contradict this idea, the advancement of the gospel isn't reliant a single ounce upon who is president. I want you to understand that where Christianity spreads the fastest and the farthest are in the nations that are persecuted the most, not where there's the most religious freedom. The reason our world is crumbling, the reason we're under the judgment of God, is because we've turned our back on God. And if you want to see political reform, you need to see a spiritual revival. It's not the other way around. You don't pursue political reform so that there can be a spiritual revival. So when people say things like, we need to get this guy in office and then there will be a spiritual revival in our land, no, there won't be. No, there won't be. That's not the way it works, and that's never been the way it works. Number 4, we should speak out against the evil of our day, but you should never turn the mission field into your enemy. You can call out the policies, call out the issues. I can speak against the horrors of abortion. Makes God weep. The trans agenda, whatever it may be. I have a heart for those people, and you ought to have a heart for them. And you can get riled up on Twitter, and you can live in your insulated bubble and start looking at them. No, that's why you're here. And if you don't understand that, you don't understand what your mission is as a Christian. Number 5, if you are more likely to promote your political views than you are to proclaim Jesus Christ, if people know you more for being a Republican than they do for being a Christ follower, your priorities are way out of whack.
All right, so that's basically where he ends it with that 5th. But that's, again, Johnny Devanis, I believe. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But David, your reaction to this came from a sermon. And one thing I want to say before I get your reaction is I don't see a lot of pastors that have the willingness to go up on the pulpit and say things like this. I will say that it's refreshing to see that him engage in that, but I find it rare in our local bodies. And again, this is just me anecdotally speaking. This could be, it just could be that I haven't seen a lot. But my pulse is that the reason why my wife sent it to me is because, like, I haven't heard a pastor speak like this about politics in front of a congregation. So, but with that being said, your reaction to that?
No, I think you're right. I think, there are a lot of things that he said that resonate with me, and I guess I'll say first that there was a widespread belief, as you know, in the 80s, 90s, which is, I'm a child of the 80s, and hearing him talk about we need to get this person elected so that things will be better. I was that guy for a lot of years. Political science major. I just thought if we could get, people who love Jesus, or we think they do, and that will uphold righteousness, if we can just get the right people elected. This was Jerry Falwell's whole thing with the moral majority. If we just get the right people elected, then everything would be amazing. Well, in a lot of cases, they did get supposedly the right people elected, and it didn't fix everything. First of all, there are no perfect people on the ballot. Jesus is not on the ballot. So it doesn't change things. But government also can't fix problems that government didn't create. If there's a problem, like just take racism. Racism is a sin problem, and government can't fix that. It can and should stop people from acting out on that and being violent, or on the basis of race, but it can't solve the love in a human heart. Government can't make you love someone that you don't love. The only one that can do that is a transformed heart by the love of Jesus. So my expectations, I guess, of government have been extremely chastened since then. that it's not about that. It's always going to be about Jesus. However, I resonate with a lot of the things that he said, that we do have to call balls and strikes and say, hey, this is, I think most pastors are really concerned about not looking like partisans. And I think that's good. I don't think we should be partisans. But at the same time, uh, it's not that the church, I heard a great sermon this past week by Josh Howerton at Lake Point Church, and he's one of the things that he says a lot is that it's not that the church is becoming more political, it's that politics is becoming more moral. And like we said earlier, that they're speaking in these moral terms. But if the church doesn't speak into this, I mean, Jesus himself said, you are the light, speaking to believers in Jesus, you are the light, not of the church, you are the light of the world. You are if the salt loses its saltiness, which salt is a preservative, if the church doesn't speak in and be the conscience of the state, then who's going to do that? So I think it's really heartening. It's good to see people being more bold about this and speaking into it. Not, and they're not getting up to say, oh, well, you ought to vote for Donald Trump because he's going to make everything amazing and he's a perfect guy, or vice versa. But it's just speaking up to, hey, when you're having a convention for a political party and they pull up a vasectomy and an abortion truck in front of the place, you have to look at that and go, this is demonic evil. It is. And I know that those are stark terms for people to hear, but the devil, as Jesus said, the devil comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but I've come that you might have life. So when you see life and um, you see love of life and preservation of life, you see the work of God. When you see, hey, let's burn it all down, let's tear it all down, let's get rid of all the laws and allow people to just come in and steal everything with impunity and burn down the cities and beat people up in the streets. What is that? That is demonic chaos, and we have to be willing to call it what it is.
One of the things that he said that I've noticed as well is that in the national politics, at least, and it creeps into state politics when you're dealing with Congress and Senate, is that these platforms or the things that they talk about, they're talking about theological issues more than they are about issues that have to do with the community. When they talk about, like you said, when they try to solve racism within how you can do that within the political environment, it's okay to talk about that, but to have a solution for it other than a solution that comes from Scripture is, like you said, it's just not going to work. It's nefarious, but it also, it lights people up, and so we I feel like, again, sitting in the pews, that are, that because the politics is so involved in these theological issues, that it only serves the congregants better if the pastor speaks to these issues in those terms. And with that, you're going to have risk, right? Because there's going to be people
You
in there.
do.
Yeah, you're going to
You
have
do. I
risk.
mean, one of the things people a lot of times will look at the abuses and for that reason step back so far. Hey, we're not going to be involved at this at all because we don't want to be seen as cheerleading for someone. I know you've seen, because here in the South, and I don't know if it happens in other places, but during presidential elections, it's not been uncommon to have Democrat politicians come into certain churches and like preach a sermon, or they bring them up there and say you ought to vote for this person, and not wanting to do that or be seen as cheerleading for that. Um, I think a lot of people have stepped too far back, and that's not, maybe myself included, but we've had a lot of conversations at our church about pastors. We got to speak into these things, and we have to be bold because, like you said, uh, people are sitting there and they're going, "Hey, what direction would my pastor give me from God, and how to look at these things?" And if we don't give that, then we're just creating a void, and somebody else is going to step in there and say, "Oh, you should just stay out of it and let us be concerned about this." Because one of the things, as I listen to him, one of the ways that we have to be careful to engage in these things is, uh, John said that when Jesus, to be across from Jesus, he said, we beheld his glory full of grace and truth. And so I think as the church, as we speak into these things, we have to be careful to speak in a way that's grace and truth. We have to speak the truth, but I think that sometimes the truth has come across as unloving because we didn't remember to bring the grace piece. Um, for instance, I feel really passionately about the abortion issue, but I think we do need to say that if somebody's had an abortion, I heard this week is 1 in 4 women that will be listening to you have had an abortion. It's wow, that's a staggering number, and those people need to hear that if that's been you, if you've done that, then God loves you. And you're not, this is not a message of condemnation. This is a message of God's love and his redeeming love. And what you've done doesn't refine you, but define you, but what he has done for you. So there's forgiveness and there's grace in that. But then on the other side of it, we have to say, but then also this is to, to tear children out of the womb. And, there's been a lot of conversation during this election cycle about late term abortion. And you've got, frankly, neither of the candidates, in my estimation, are speaking very clearly to this. This is where the church needs to step in because, we're not politicians. We're not speaking for people to give us votes. We're speaking to say, hey, this is an evil thing we shouldn't do. And we've got one of the candidates, Donald Trump, is he's kind of moderated his position from what it was before, and kind of trying to move towards, I don't know, maybe what would be called the political center, and say, hey, we're going to provide some, I don't want an abortion ban, and we're gonna limit this, but not as much as we were going to. Uh, so I wish that was not the case, but that's definitely his position over against the position of we have Kamala Harris is unwilling to cite any instance where she wants to limit abortion in any way, all the way up to 9 months, and that's just an unthinkable thing to do. So the church has to speak into that because neither of the candidates are speaking from a place where the scriptures would speak to this.
Yeah, and in specific to that issue, that is you have those. You did a beautiful job of kind of articulating where each candidate stands, and it does seem like Trump, and even I think his wife came out just recently as very pro-choice, and was disheartened by that personally. I'm not afraid to say that personally. It was disheartening to hear that. But with that being said, there's going to be one administration that's going to be kind, and they're going to listen to some of us and have some of us in their administration, and then there's one that just absolutely won't have it. And so we have to live in what our old friend says, Realville, a friend of ours. We have to live in Realville, and that's how we have to adjudicate who we support and who we put our vote behind. And the life issue in my estimation, again, I'm going to speak personally on this. It is the issue of our time, just like slavery was the issue for the Civil War. This is the issue for our time. I believe that in the coming years, in 30 or 40 years, the generation that our kids are going to look back on us and go, wow, what were you guys thinking? Really, what were you guys thinking about that specific issue? I'm heartened by the fact that I believe that's going to happen. I'm disheartened at the fact that we can't deal with that and abolish it and get rid of it yesterday. But with that being said, we've covered national politics. But one of the things I do believe is, we both live here in Tennessee. A lot of our friends here on this podcast, I live in Indiana, they live in some of the Midwest states. How should Christians engage in their local elections? Should we have the same? I mean, what does it mean to be an alderman to a mayor? I mean, what kind of things should we be looking for? With when it comes to local politics.
Well, local politics, obviously, they matter quite a bit because we have a lot more interaction with our local politicians than we do with those at the national level. So one of the things that's been really great to see is I mean, you and I have talked about quite a bit. We've chosen to make different decisions for our kids based on what's going on in public schools. And the thing that, a lot of people, and, people will pray about it and make their own decisions, whether homeschool, private school, public school, whatever, and that's all fine. But I've got several friends that they saw what was going on in the schools, and their kids were still going to be in those schools. So what they did is they said, well, I want to have a role in this, and I want to be able to speak into this and lead this, the way that I believe it should go. And they ran for school board. So got several friends that are on school boards now, and that I don't really remember that being a thing that the church really focused on much at all. And these are people that are pastors of churches that have said, "Hey, I want to get involved on the school board and have a say in this." So I think that's a really important way to engage, to actually get involved in that. And then the other thing that's great about local politics is that they're right down the street. And so if you need to go and grab lunch with somebody, or you need to go talk to your mayor, chances are you're going to be able to get in touch with them. And so we ought to love and support them. First of all, they shouldn't. I can say this as a pastor: please don't only come to me when you have something that you want to criticize me about. I'm open to that. I need that. But sometimes could it be, hey, appreciate what you're doing? That would be great as well, so that they feel that love and support coming from us. I think that's important.
It's funny you say that, because this is what I know about pastors and politicians. You guys get flooded with so much encouragement.
So much love.
So much love, so much encouragement. And folks,
and you and I talked about this too. Over the last 4 years, if you go to church and you have a pastor, encourage your pastor, because these past 4 years have been brutal. Because the decisions that pastors had to make during COVID were there was no right decision to make. If you said, "Hey, we're not going to meet in person," 50% of the people were so mad. I mean, every time I went to the grocery store, I was hearing it from one side or the other. "Hey, why aren't we doing this? And what's the deal with this? And what do you think about this?" And man, it was just, my head was spinning. And then of course, with all the political things, it's kind of the same way too. What you speak into, what you don't speak into. So definitely encourage them.
Yes, it's one of those things that we've all, as human beings, got to get better at. When we see something that somebody does well, we're more likely to just say in our mind, "Oh, that's cool." But when we see something that we get hurt by, we'll get the keyboard out, or we may even send them a text, or if we're really bold, we give them a call. And sometimes that's warranted. Sometimes that's warranted. But it would be great if we saw our aldermen, our mayors, the people that are in charge, and they were doing something well, that you individually encourage them, talk to them, made it a practice of just like when you're seeing your kids do something well, you want to encourage that, and just be a noticer of that, because it is so easy. It's even my bent to get, just like every human being, but even me especially, to see something and get triggered by it in a negative way, and then fire off something, or just be or just post something on social media that may needed a little bit more thought and some time to marinate on. But it's good. So this is one of the things that we did talk about is we made a decision to take our kids in a private school. But I can say this, I think that I'm encouraged by Christians that are engaged in the public school system, that are sitting on the school board, that are making decisions there. I'm encouraged by that. But seeing things the way they are, I'm also encouraged about the homeschool movement. I'm encouraged about the private schools. I'm encouraged about choices for people to make sure that their kids get the education that they need. But more importantly, and I'll just say this unabashedly, if your kids are at a place for that long a period of time, and there's a specific, like we talked about earlier, there is a moral imperative there that doesn't align up with your values, then your expectation of that kid coming home and not espousing your same views should be expected, because they're getting inundated with it. So that's where I would caution, and I would exhort families, parents, to really think through that issue very, very strongly. Talk to their pastors, talk to folks, talk to and engage in the process of the teachers and the school board. What are they teaching? What are they teaching your kids? Every day.
Mike, you said something a while back. I might get you in trouble by saying this, but
That's okay.
You already made it public, so it's fine. But I actually thought it was brilliant that you said, I had never had this thought before. You said that a lot of parents, they send their kids off to school and they say, hey, I'm sending my kid off to be a missionary. Well, what they don't realize is that depending on where they go to school, okay, it's a mission field, but your kid's not the missionary. Your kid is the one that is someone is seeking to convert. And wow, that's absolutely true. Depending on where you live, and there are people that want to deprogram your kids in a bad way and say, oh, all of these things that your parents have taught you to believe, the Bible, all that, let's throw that out. And here's what you really need to believe. And there's an agenda there. Now, I know a lot of parents whose kids go to schools that are like that, and they're very mindful of it and they're very proactive. But if you're not, that's extremely dangerous. I think that's what you were getting at, right?
Yes, yes. I think that, and in fact, I've had other conversations with people, and they sit at the dinner table and they talk about what happened at school today, and they're able to walk their kids through what Scripture says about it. But if you're not that intentional about it, your kids are going to have no basis to counter maybe some things that they learn. The ideas are out there, and people that you'll find out about them, and that you just got to figure out how do you parse through those ideas. And but yeah, and again, we live in a state where it's not as bad as other areas, but it's still got we got some things to be worked through and to be countered. So
Absolutely.
well, David, we've reached about 37 minutes on the podcast. We try to keep these things between 30 minutes and 45 minutes. Thank you for being on the podcast. With that being said, with all the things that are going on with Christians and government, is there any final thoughts that you have? What do you exhort the men of our audience to kind of do after listening to us talk about this?
Well, I think just to look at what's going on in our country, and with sober judgment, and just be able um, to speak the truth about what's going on. I think I'm so heartened when if no one stands up and says the true thing, then people that are thinking it, they feel like, oh, well, maybe we're not allowed to say that. And I think that's one of the most dangerous things about silence. So I've been trying to be more proactive in just saying the true thing, and and speaking up for just common sense, and looking out at the world though with love. One of the big lies about our politics is that if you advocate against something, then whoever that policy impacts, you hate those people. Like if you think that we should control our border, therefore you hate immigrants. We don't hate immigrants. That would be insane. We're all immigrants in the United States of America. We're a country of immigrants, um, but things need to be done legally and in order. I mean, that's just common sense. If we leave the door of our country unlocked and are overrun, that's not showing love to the people that live here, to the people that have worked really hard and come here legally and gone through all the right stuff. I mean, so that's just insane. We need to be able to say things like that. And then, like you touched on with regards to religious liberty. I mean, if we don't stand up for the people that are being abused. I was thinking about Jack Phillips, the baker out in Colorado. I mean, he's just had to one thing after another because the government is trying to come in and violate his conscience. He doesn't feel like he can do something based on his religious convictions, and the government's saying you have to. Thankfully, he's won all of those cases, but it's been one thing after another. So I hope that all of these things that are going on, as bad as they are, will cause us to say, you know what, we're at a point now where if we don't speak now, if we don't vote now, if we don't get involved in this now and speak up, then how long are we going to be able to speak up? Because Jack Phillips is just, I mean, he could be me or you in this scenario.
He could be. We could be. And so I love that you left us with, hey, speak the truth. There could be a cost to it, so count the cost. Christ tells us to count the cost, and know that when you speak the truth, that there are repercussions for it. But to not speak the truth is saying something as well, and it's saying something that has a deep meaning as well. So, David Tillman, thank you for being on the IRD podcast, folks. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next time on the IRD podcast. Have a great week, folks.